and we have two eminent speakers in that area. First is Matto Mildenberger, and Matto is a professor in political science here at UCSB, and he's the co-founder of the UCSB 2035 initiative, and he'll tell you all about that. He's got his PhD from Yale. He's written a number of books, and he and his colleagues here are well known in sort of the policy circles. They influenced the climate bill that was recently passed as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, et cetera, and so he'll talk more about that. So with that, Matto.
Thanks, Mark, and really excited that we'll hear from, move it up. Great, that better? Okay. All right, perfect. Thanks, Mark. And so, UCSB is also, beyond all of the incredibly impressive materials engineering work that we've been hearing about all day, it's also partly as a result of an oil spill that we all know a lot about, has invested an enormous amount in social science and policy scholarship on topics in energy and climate. And we really have, I think, probably the largest concentration of energy and environmental politics scholars anywhere in the world at this point. And so in the last year or two, it's been really exciting to bring that community into the IEE fold through this new 2035 initiative that is a joint project of the Institute, the Social Science Division, and what we're trying to do is leverage all of the work that we're doing on the human factor and bring it into dialogue with this engineering and these large energy systems problems that we're all navigating. As a social scientists, we've all been struggling, those of us who study climate and energy, that we see all of these amazing technologies. There's sort of this intuition that we can bring them down the experience curve as the costs go down and deployment goes up, and often policy and the social side of things, government actions are this sort of third dimension of those experience curves, right? The inefficiency of changing minds or changing policies that the Mildenberger talked about. So I want to talk a little bit about just that human factor for a little bit, talk about a few of the studies that our team has been working on, thinking about in California, how people are responding to the energy transition, how they're responding to the impacts of climate change, and how that human side of things has worked or not worked. And then I'll say a few things about the 2035 initiative, and I think then David Victor from UC San Diego is going to give us an important pitch about what we need to do next. So the challenge here, of course, is that the politics and policymaking context of managing energy and climate has been at a stalemate across the world. We've had some recent successes, but they've come at a big lag. And so we need to have an enormous amount of policy change to support all of these different energy and climate priorities. And what's going to reshape the politics of these issues so that we can actually drive forward the investments and regulatory changes necessary to live up to the potential of all of these new systems. And there has been a hope for a while that as the impacts of climate change materialize, it's going to sort of solve the problem of climate politics, because people are going to respond to all of these changes they see everywhere in their. Oh, okay.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Just you're flickering a little bit.
Okay.
Not you are.
Yeah. I'm quantum entangled, right? I'm not here. Okay, great. So, our lab has been doing a lot of work trying to think about how Californians are engaging with all of these changes, how that's driving their consumer preferences, how that's driving their voting behavior, and how sort of the social and human factor gets integrated into these debates over climate and energy policy. So to run through a few examples of this type of work that's happening, we look at wildfires, look at the distribution of those wildfires, and we can assess if people are reacting to those local climatic extremes by voting in different ways, for instance, on various California ballot initiatives, right? And so we're finding that, we are seeing shifts, up to a 5 percentage point increase in support at the ballot box for costly climate policies in precincts that are adjacent to a wildfire, but only amongst more Democratic-leaning parts of the state. And so there's a real sense in which people who are already engaged in debates around climate science, who might accept climate science are sort of having their prioritization being mobilized, but we're not converting new people into the fold of supporting the type of climate and energy tech that we need. We can look at wind. We've done quite a bit of work around public safety power shutoffs, where this is some work that we did in 2019 when there was the massive PSPS event in the Bay Area, where we sampled people basically chest inside and chest outside of various outage zones to try and understand how the experience of these power failures were shaping a range of different consumer-facing technologies, right? And so, we find, for instance, here that EV adoption is significant. Intention to adopt EVs and sort of interest in adopting EVs is significantly decreased in someone who is, 500 meters inside a power outage zone relative to a peer who's living 500 meters on sort of the other side of that power safety shutoff event. So this is a sweet spot of the work that we're doing in the 2035 initiative, trying to think at a very high spatial resolution way about the human and sort of social policy factors that are driving this. Water, we know, for instance, in the Bay Area that even people living in like incredibly coastally vulnerable housing have a belief that people in other parts of the U.S. are more vulnerable to the effects of sea level rise than they themselves are. We've done some very high resolution experiments where we invite people to take a survey. Here's a sort of like an example of the experimental treatment. This is in the Bay Area. The stars are sort of an individualized location of an individual's property who's responding to the survey. We're randomizing whether they see this map or not, and we also sort of have people again on either side of these discontinuities. Seeing these sorts of maps reduces their interest in taking advantage or in taking action on sea level rise. There's some very complex psychological reasons why this is the case. People have, when they get certain types of information about risk, they begin processing that risk in different ways, which can sort of undermine their intention to act. And so, is that back on? Okay. By contrast, we've done work where we give people estimates of the commute time increases associated with a certain level of flooding by the same date. And that type of more systemic risk communication is sort of driving people to engage in both behavioral and attitudinal adoption. So we're doing work in thinking about like how can we communicate with vulnerable publics on the types of behavioral adaptations they need and the types of technological investments they might want to make at the consumer level, and doing empirically grounded work to sort of understand those systems. Okay, I'll also say we've done work on solar PV, trying to understand, for instance, are at the consumer level, are people adopting solar PV as a result of sort of ideological commitment to climate, or is it really sort of a story where the cost and the individual household level financial benefit of solar adoption is what's driving that PV? So we working with Google satellite data, we can create a fully sort of representative random sample of houses that have PV on their roofs. And we can compare those with a random sample of neighboring houses. Again, merge that with things like the voter file. And what we see is that the adoption of some technologies here, including solar technologies, are being driven by the financial side of things rather than the ideological side of things. So we see like incredible penetration, for instance, of solar PV in Republican households across the US, which would be very consistent with this being a more market-driven rather than ideologically driven story, right? So if I, in our data, if you were dropped in front of a house at some point anywhere in the country and you saw there was a solar system on its roof, the likelihood of that household being a sort of a Democratic voter or a Republican voter is essentially unknown. I mean, it's going to be consistent with the distribution of Republicans and Democrats in that neighborhood, but once you're within a neighborhood, you can't know anything else. So all of this work that's been happening has really pointed to the need for social solutions as well to our shared environmental problems, and this has been sort of the basis for the 2035 initiative. There is a lot of great social science work and a policy work out there that will find you the right answer in 5 years on how to support a given policy. For those of you who spend time in DC, there's also some, a lot of people who will give you the 60% right answer by Monday. And the vision here with what we're calling a think and do tank that we're really excited to incorporate inside of IEE is to try and find the sweet spot in between that. And so how can we leverage about 15 social and, energy and climate policy labs that exist here, political science at Bran and environmental studies, and Ranjit and Eric who are here have been a big part of that. And how can we think about doing empirically rigorous but publicly engaged scholarship on policy problems at the 6 to 9 month sort of window, where we get at least 95% right by then. And so, through IE, we've been hiring a range of sort of staff to support this, research analysts, quite a bit of work integrating our work with Bren and undergraduate students across campus. And here we've been doing a range of really interesting work on phasing out fossil fuels, accelerating the clean energy transition, adapting to climate change, and trying to bring the social science expertise that really exists on this campus into dialogue with all of this incredible engineering materials and sort of technological stuff that's going on. So the work we do, both responsive to stakeholders that we work with in government, in advocacy groups, and both elected officials and bureaucrats. And we are very engaged in sort of trying to get a sense of what are the near-term empirical questions that would really animate better climate and energy policymaking, and then leveraging a lot of the resources and skills that exist here on campus to produce a think and do answer to those people in relatively short order. So that's been a big part of the work that we've been doing in the last couple months, and it's thrilling that we can be here in IE. So thanks to John for supporting our incorporation inside IE. Great.
Some questions from Addo. And David, you can come on up and start getting ready.
Well, I'm a little gun shy of the computer now.
No,
Yeah, exactly.
we fixed it. Jenna fixed it, I should say. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of stuff that we've done. Even Mark mentioned, for instance, that a number of the folks involved in the initiative were quite engaged with the IRA, and it was in a fairly empirically driven way, in that people had done research on what type of policies would generate particular political support coalitions. What are who are the actors which need to be engaged in which ways, and so the type of advocacy that was happening was very deeply informed. So we had a faculty member who was very involved in thinking about a national CES, or Clean Energy Performance Program standard, that was deeply informed by sort of the empirical research that was being done. We have a faculty member, Grace Wu, who is involved, who's currently through the initiative doing some modeling that's going to inform the Farm Bill in January, February of this year, and just a wide variety of different work. I'll give you another example. We're part of a research team that's going to be integrating social science data with electricity system and grid modeling in the state to try and really bring in the preferences of disadvantaged communities when it comes to microgrids and electrification needs into the grid models of how we might think about distributing grid investments in the next couple of years. So there's, I think, really cool stuff happening, and I expect that it's going to be a lot of fun stuff that we can push out through IE in the next couple of years.
Okay. One more question, I think we have time for.
Are you engaging at all with the faith communities?
We have some faculty who have, and who have thought quite a bit about particularly on issues of mobilizing people to engage elected officials in faith communities. I've been very involved in a number of different projects to develop data sets at a very high spatial resolution of what Americans think, for instance, about climate change. Partly through my partners at the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication. And so they, through that work, for instance, groups like Interfaith Power and Light and a number of really important faith-based organizations have been deeply engaged in sort of thinking about that data.
Okay, thanks
Right.
again, Meadow.
Thanks.
One thing I want to mention is that there are about 150 or so energy institutes in the United States in different universities. Typically, they're small things where there's some folks focused on policy. You know, they're embedded in a political science department, or they're technologically oriented institutes. But it's unusual to have an institute like this one that now has a major policy arm in addition to the technology efforts. And the interesting thing about that is we inform each other. You know, as the work goes on, if there's something you want to, you know, make happen, often part of the solution is to have the right policy things in place and the right technical solutions in place. And having those things together is very powerful for us. So thanks again, Matto, for joining us.